right. So what a wonderful, wonderful sister we have here today. Her name is Harprit. And as always, Harprit, we always appreciate your leadership in the community. But as always, in Setsi here, we always begin things with an acknowledgement of our ancestors. So we also, okay, let me start by saying we acknowledge the original stewards of the various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. All right, so please, sister, can you please introduce yourself to our viewers and listeners?
Yes, first, Mahat, I just wanted to say thank you. I'm excited to have this conversation with you. But for everyone else, my name is Harprit Gill. I am a certified financial advisor and financial educator. I've been in this space now for about 5 years. And it's interesting, how I kind of got into this space, which I know we're going to get into it in a little bit. But this is what I feel like is my passion, is just to educate people about financial literacy and help people understand that achieving wealth is not a far-fetched goal, and it is really attainable as long as we get the knowledge and the information, and we're actually able to apply the teachings that we learn as well. So it's not as far-fetched as we think, as long as we educate ourselves.
Exactly, exactly. All right, so that's perfect segue for our first question. So please tell us about how you began your journey of educating members of our community on financial literacy.
It's interesting. I never in a million years did I think that I was going to be in this area of finances or anything to do with money or math. But it really started because I wanted to kind of get a grasp of my financial affairs and understand money a little bit better and learn about home ownership. And I thought, where's the best place that I could possibly go? And I thought to the bank. And I made an appointment with an advisor. I'd never spoken to an advisor before that. But I figured, if I can go to my bank and ask a few questions, at least I can get the right information to make the right moves. And I wanted to learn a little bit about mortgages. And I know it was a form of a debt, but I didn't know how a mortgage actually worked. So when I had gone to that appointment, they made me put my card into the card reader. And they looked at my account, and in like less than 2 minutes in my appointment, they pretty much just said to come back when I had $60,000 in my bank account. And that is when I can come back and speak to somebody and ask some questions. And honestly, that took me off guard. I know that lots of systems are just designed for us to fail and, keep us, oppressed. But I didn't think like the bank that I've been banking with since I was a young teenager, that was going to deny me information, just a few questions. And I was like, can I just ask two and I'll get out of here? And they were like, no, come back when you had 60,000 and we'll talk to you then. And mind you, I had like $33,000 of debt because I had my student loan. So I was working on paying that off, but I was also working 5 jobs. I was focused and determined on paying off my debt, building up a down payment for a home, but they wouldn't give me, any sort of time or space. And that's when I realized that I need to kind of get a grasp of this stuff on my own. And I started learning about money, credit, debts, investing, all of this type of stuff. And the more I learned, the more fascinated I became. And, coming from a social work background, that's what I did for 17 years. Coming from that background, I went into social work because I have a passion for my community. I grew up in Jane and Finch. I've always had a vision of, wanting to create something impactful. And being a social worker, I started to realize that you can't make the impact that you're looking to make on a systemic level. You can make it on individual levels, but on a systemic level, it's almost impossible to create that. And the more I started learning about money, the more I started realizing the reasons why they don't teach us this stuff in school. And I figured, you know what? This is something that we need to learn as a community, because the only way to create real systemic change is through ownership. But if we don't have money, if we're not versed in our knowledge with money and how money works, so many of us are going to miss the opportunity to have ownership of anything. And I figured, you know what, this is a great place for me to maybe take what I, have in my social work skills and maybe go get licensed and become a certified financial advisor. And that's what I did. I paired the two worlds together and started my own business, which I am super grateful for because it allows me to be bias free. I don't have to work for any one institution. I'm not restricted to, quotas and targets. So I can focus on my clients. I can get to truly understand their situation and I can educate them as opposed to just forcing products and not really understanding their situations.
Perfect, perfect. That is so needed in our community, I'm telling you. So can you articulate your mission and vision for me?
My mission really is to revolutionize the financial services industry. Right now, I want to be able to educate as many Canadians as possible, especially people from minority communities, right? One of the things that I used to always wonder is like, why did my parents leave India to come to Canada? Because, you always heard this thing growing up that Canada is the land of opportunity. And I'm looking around and everybody I'm seeing is struggling. So I'm thinking to myself, okay, we left somewhere, whereas at least the weather was nice. And even if we were poor back home, the little that we had was okay. Like we didn't have to, it's not like how it is here. And I just couldn't wrap my finger around why so many immigrants come to this country. And I started to realize that, in Canada, we work on a credit system. And that credit system is not the same how it works in other parts of the world. And if you understand how debt works, debt is really the way you would use to build real wealth. But most of us use credit to put us in more harms and put us in more deeper situations that we sometimes cannot get out of or becomes challenging to get out of. And so when I started learning about money and started realizing that, in Canada, we really can build something if we understand how money works. Because if I was back home, in order for me to get a loan, I need to have collateral, which means I already have to have something to be able to borrow against my assets. So if I don't have an asset, then I can't get a loan. And if that doesn't happen, that means I can't build anything. But in Canada, we can build something if we have good credit and understand how credit works, because we can use other people's money to leverage to build our wealth. But so many of us just don't know that information. So these are the kind of things that just made me realize, like, financial literacy is like not even that much about money. Honestly, it's not even about numbers. It's really about rules and understanding those rules and knowing how to navigate those rules to make them work for you. Because one of the things that I realized is that, whether we're wealthy, whether we're not, we're all operating in the same system. The only difference between the wealthy and the rest of us is the wealthy understand the rules of money and they know how to take advantage to make sure that those rules are going to work for them and not against them.
Exactly. Can you imagine how powerful it would have been if we had this in like kindergarten on up? I know some private communities, okay,
Yeah.
that offer this to their adolescent children from toddler.
Yeah.
Okay, they have their little counting system. They holding paper money, fake money.
Yeah.
Then Monopoly and all these things. But it was taken. We didn't. It wasn't taken in as just a game. It was
Right.
life. You know.
Right.
So what? I mean, I look back and say, man, how our community would actually be if we
It's
actually
so
had this in the
true.
school system.
It's so true because it's about the mindset, right? And
Yes,
we're so scared of money. We've been taught that money is the root of all even all evil and all these things.
exactly.
So many of us even don't even want to build wealth or get to the point of building wealth because from young, our parents have told us, well, if people who have a lot of money, they're just evil. And so
Hmm.
that was one of my things that I was scared of. I was like, I want to be an evil person. So I don't really care to have a lot of money. I just want to have enough to be comfortable so that a way I don't have to struggle. And I think that's one of the first things is just that shaping our mindset. And that's I think the most challenging part. And you're right. If we learn this stuff when we're younger, by the time we get into even our teenage years and into early adulthood, we would have a very different perception. And that would be a game changer for
Game
all of
changer.
us. And it's funny that you
Exactly.
mentioned that. I'm actually right now, I'm working on children's work books and literacy, things like that. So
Yay.
we'll be
I'm sure
coming.
I'm going to ask you that at the end for sure. So hold that thought.
Yeah.
Okay. So this, you've already answered this question, but I guess in a summary, what inspires you about your work?
Honestly, I've always been a people person. That's always been, I think, my strength. I didn't realize that. And I'll share a little bit of part of this story because I think a lot of times we think that we have to be really strong in academia to be able to be successful in the world. And that's what we've been told. If we're not a doctor, lawyer, one of these high prestigious careers, then you can't be successful. And from when I was young, I was always put into the slow classes because I wasn't diagnosed with dyslexia, but I'm pretty sure I have it. But I was a really slow learner when it came to reading, writing, all of that kind of stuff. And so, as I got older, my confidence really wasn't there when it came to the school stuff. But one thing that I knew that I loved doing was helping people. I had a big heart. I would be, I would take my shirt off for someone that I didn't even know. And I didn't realize that that was a skill. And and that was a gift. And so as I got older, like I mentioned, I've always had a vision of wanting to make an impact in my community. I remember, having this vision of creating a community center in Jane and Finch because I remember, years ago, we went to London, Ontario to go play a basketball tournament, and the Boys and Girls Club that was there, girl, let me tell you, it had a Olympic-sized swimming pool, had a rock climbing wall, it had
Nice.
massive indoor soccer field, basketball court, everything. And I couldn't believe that was a Boys and Girls Club. And because the Boys and Girls Club that I attended in Jane and Finch was a small Toronto housing like townhome. And
Yeah.
so when I seen that vision, I was like, I was so gung-ho on wanting to build that for my community. But as you got older, you start to realize, like, how are you going to do that if you don't have money?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So that's
Oh,
what inspires me.
that's amazing. That's amazing. Oh, it'll happen. It'll have people like you who are really pushing for the community. The stuff like that will manifest for our people, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are the biggest barriers in your work?
I would say some of the biggest barriers is, I got into this field because I said to myself, like, I want to see people like myself and people who are in my community rise up from their circumstances. And I think the biggest challenge is shifting the mindset, right? So like we talked about, if we had learned this from when we were younger, this would be already embedded into our system and it would become second nature. We wouldn't have to think twice about these things. But when you have 20, 30, 40, 50 plus years of a conditioning and habits, those are the things that are the most challenging, I would say, to kind of tackle, because that's not a one time, let's just sit down and have a consultation. That requires us pretty much counseling and going to the deep rooted cause of what are the things that are causing these habitual habits, right? And so because the habits are the most important things. They're the most easy things, but they're most challenging things at the same time. It's always easier said than done, right? So I would say that is probably by far one of the biggest challenges, is really the mindset and helping people come to the other side. And when I first started my business, my biggest thing was, trying to help everybody, but
Mhm.
kind of like that notion of, if you can bring the horse to the water, but you can't force it to drink. And I'm at the point of my business now where I'm like, I still want to help my community, but I also have to focus on the people who want to be helped, because the ones who don't want to be helped, it's a big challenge. It's a big obstacle.
Absolutely. And it's like you said, it's deep rooted. There's a
Right.
lot of trauma built up with financial illiteracy.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly. And just the relationship with money too, right?
Relationship. Yeah. Yeah.
Seeing
Exactly.
how our families kind of grew up, the way that our mothers or our fathers
Hmm.
have been when it came to money
Exactly.
as well.
That's right. That's right. So, what are the, tell us about your wealth quadrant.
Okay, so the wealth quadrant actually is called the cash flow quadrant. This is a concept that was coined by Robert Kiyosaki. He's the author that wrote the book Rich Dad Poor Dad. And he talks about the different ways that we can earn income, and just literally think of a circle, and in it has a quadrant, and each quadrant represents a different letter or a different word. And so the first quadrant is the employee quadrant. And what he says is that, being an employee, that's what we've been conditioned. If you think about it, like the schooling system is designed for us to be the perfect employees. We have 2 recesses, 15 minutes, and a lunch break, 30 minutes. That's literally what we have in the workplace,
That's
right?
right. That's right.
And we've been conditioned from kindergarten all the way up to high school. And if you do post-secondary, then you have that as well. But we've been conditioned, to trade our time, right?
Mhm.
And whether you're making 50,000 a year or 150,000 a year, the problem with that quadrant is that you're forever going to have to trade your time for money. So there's no
Mhm.
such thing as financial freedom.
Right.
And one of the things that I started to realize is, I know we all had aspirations of, having high salaries, once we got to a certain level in our lives, because, as responsibilities, inflation, things are so expensive. But you start to realize the more you make, the more responsibilities you have. And the more
Mhm.
responsibilities you have, the more of a, to use of a lack of better words, the more of a slave we are to the system,
That's right.
right? Think about people who are high six-figure earners. They have work laptops, they have work phones, that they're constantly working almost around the clock. So your time is literally strapped, and there's only 24 hours in a day. So there's only so much time we can trade, right? And then there's a second quadrant, which is the self-employed quadrant. And it's a beautiful place to start. But I think a lot of us think that when we're self-employed is that we have a business. And that's one of the false misunderstandings that so many of us have, but we don't have a business. Because the only difference between being self-employed and being an employee is that you go from working for somebody, now you just work for yourself. And so you're still trading time for money. So if you needed to take a vacation, you're no longer earning. If you have a sick day, you're not earning. If you don't have clients, you're not earning. So the
Right.
same concept, right? In fact, if you think about it, most people who are self-employed, yes, possibly you could make more money than a person who's employed, but they're also still working around the clock. And once you
Right.
stop working, the income stops coming in. And then you have your business owner, which is the third quadrant. And a business owner is someone who owns a system. For anyone who's ever watched or haven't watched this movie, it's called The Founder. I highly recommend it because it's about how McDonald's actually first came about, like who the founders of McDonald's were, and the
Mhm.
system that they created to simplify the entire process. So you're thinking, oh, McDonald's, like what kind of system would they need? It's just a burger and fry shop. But no, they had a system down to making sure orders are done in like less than 30 seconds, drive through, down to like how much mustard, ketchup, pickles, all of those kind of things. That's literally going down to the system. And what a system allows you to do is it allows you to duplicate, because what you can
Duplicate.
do is you can hire people and you can teach them, hey, at the fry station, that's you push that button 30 seconds or whatever, a minute and 30 seconds. The burger station, you train those people, you can duplicate that. Like you can duplicate every part of the system. So that's why when you even look at McDonald's, a lot of people who are working in McDonald's are either students or sometimes elderlies who don't possibly can't retire yet, right? So it's a
Mhm.
duplicatable system. So that's what a business owner is. So that if you choose to take your feet and kick up, then the system is still operating. And then you have your last quadrant, which is your investors quadrant. And your investors are the people who make their money work for them, whether they're investing in real estate, private lending, venture capitals, things of that sort. So you're making your money work for you. You are no longer a slave to money. And the goal of the cash flow quadrant and the wealth quadrant is that you want to go from the left side, which is the employee and the self-employed, to the right side, which is the business and the investors, because the people who are investors and business owners, they get 100% of freedom because they are no longer working for money. And two, the biggest problem, I would say one of the biggest problems or impacts in our ability to build wealth here, especially in North America, is the impact of taxes. So when you're on the right side of the quadrant, you pay way less more taxes than someone who is self-employed or someone who's an employee. And this is, I think, one of the biggest solutions. Like, of course, mindset for sure, and how we spend our money is another thing, but we can only make so many cutbacks to our expenses, because even if, you get an extra few, coffees a week or extra few, takeout meals, you cutting those out is not going to impact your ability to build wealth in a massive way. Our ability to build wealth is to actually reduce the amount of taxes we pay and how much money we can make without trading so much of our time.
Oh, it's true. You broke that down perfectly. I vividly remember you can still even find them on YouTube, Robert Kiyosaki breaking it down. And I mean, it's so important for everyone to really take that in. Yeah, for
Right,
sure.
yes.
Thank you. And what tools are most useful for your clients and community that you engage?
So I do a lot of reality checks when I'm whether I'm educating, whether I'm sitting down with a client. And what I mean by reality checks is that, I think that one of the things I always say, that even if our parents didn't have the literacy to teach us, if they explain things in a way of the consequences, we might have been able to maybe start thinking about saving earlier. Like, one of the things I can think about my mom, she always told me, save money, save money, save money. And I did for a while because she forced me to. But when I got to being about 18, 19, I was like, well, if you're going to die one day, what's the point?
I
Why can't
had
I
that
live
too.
my life?
Right?
She had explained to me, how the world works and how things operate and how expensive it is to be an adult, once you're
Mm,
your parents' home. I think I would have reevaluated things a little bit better. I would have put away, even if it was $100 a month, because, the thing about investing is that when you start young, you can start with small increments and you can still have a substantial amount by the time you retire. But as we get older, time is no longer on our side. So we have to save more, right? So I use a lot of reality checks. I do a lot of activities because I'm a believer that I'm not just here to teach, I'm here to help people have a realization. And that those are two different things. And I want people to come to their own understanding of why something is important, not just because I'm telling them that something is good for them or it's not good for them. So, hence the reason why I focus on education, because I'm a believer that with education, everything becomes a little bit easier, because now it's no longer it's not just me forcing things on you, but I'm actually giving you the blueprint on, the things that the wealthy people are doing. Now it's just a matter of, are you going to put the action in? Because, so many times we say knowledge is power. And I think, yes, knowledge is power, but I believe the application of knowledge is actually more powerful.
that's right. That's right. That's right. Putting it into action.
Yes, exactly.
Exactly. And what are the biggest barriers to generational wealth for Canadians?
I would say, one, the fact that we're not earning enough. The average Canadian is making about $60,000. That's as an individual. And to be considered even like middle class these days, you have to be earning about $130,000 as a household income. And we know that's not the average. So the lack of income is one problem, but I also believe the spending habits are another problem as well, because everything starts with small steps before you can get into the next level, right? So a lot of times when I sit down with my clients, most people don't have any sort of cash flow left over at the end of the month, meaning there's nothing to work with, whether to pay off their debt or save money. So I usually get people to do a needs and wants activity. So I usually get them to go back into their last 2 to 3 months of their bank statements, and I make them go line for line and I identify whether that purchase was a need or a want. And oftentimes I come around, I would say about a $600-700 average, sometimes more, but about average, about $700 is what I see we can find people spending miscellaneously on areas that are just, whether it's Ubers or Uber Eats, things like that,
Hmm.
especially the young generation, because, you know, uh, uh, accessibility and convenience is such a thing these days that we're not thinking about, where are we spending our money? How are we spending it? And the consequences of, these small purchases, because you think, oh, $5, oh, that's not a big deal. Then another $10, not a big deal, but all of those dollars add up, right? So I think those two things are a big thing when it comes to building wealth, but also I think that generational wealth over the last, I would say 3-4 years has become a very trendy word to say. And I don't think people really understand what generational wealth truly means. Generational wealth is the transfer of wealth from one generation to the other. But what a lot of people don't realize that in that transfer of wealth, there's a whole legal process that takes place. So one thing that I tell people often is that the unfortunate reality of every single one of our, existence is that we're worth more dead than we are alive. When we pass away, if we have debt, that will potentially get transferred over to our next in kin, right? So if you have a car loan, credit card debts, things of that sort, that just doesn't vanish into thin air. That could potentially get passed on to whoever's next. And that, that creates generations of poverty. And then think about, just for example, like our deaths, our funerals is about, on average, $25,000 is what a cost for a funeral is. And I don't know the average person who even has $2,000 saved up, much less $25,000 to bury one of their loved ones at an unexpected time. So that's those things right there is so impactful because people don't realize the importance of life insurance. And life insurance is one of those things that you don't value now, but when a situation happens, it's one of the things that will save you, right? Because that's where you can transfer the easiest amount of wealth, because anything that you pass from a life insurance policy will go to the beneficiary tax-free. So the government will not come after that money. And then the other thing about generational wealth is that, let's just say, for example, somebody died last year, and let's say they died, let's say around October, and they have, let's say, 2 properties, they have a tax-free savings account, retirement savings, they have a business. You would assume, just the way that debt gets passed on to our loved ones, that our assets should also do the same. But it doesn't. So what's the first thing that the government will do? They'll seize the estate. So that means your estate is everything that's under ownership under that deceased person. So let's just say if I have all these things that I own, that's my estate. So whoever that person that passed away, the government is going to freeze that estate. And now it's going to go through something called an estate process. And the first thing that they're going to do is they're going to, evaluate what you have. And they want to charge capital gains taxes, which is they're going to take a look at the profits, the equity of each and every asset that you have. And the family has to now pay capital gains tax on that. There's another thing called probate taxes. And probate taxes is literally just administrative tax. In Ontario, we pay 1.5% on every $1,000 after $50,000. So that's another tax we have to pay. And then there's a final tax. So although this person died last year, their family is still responsible in 2023 to make sure that they paid their last year's taxes, their income taxes, did their taxes. So if you ever look at a tax form, the first page is the information sheet, and you'll see there's a checkbox for alive or deceased. So they know that you're closing this person's, pretty much their life off, and there's no more taxes owing once those final taxes are taken care of. Now, this is what can happen. If you have life insurance, the whole goal is supposed to be to take care of all those taxes, so that way you can inherit the wealth without depleting it because of the taxations. Now, if someone doesn't have life insurance, now what's going to have to happen is the government doesn't care if you don't have the money, you're going to have to start selling those assets off. And I'm not saying you're going to end up selling everything, but you could end up potentially selling off a good chunk of it, because we don't know what those tax amounts are going to be. And that means you've just depleted your wealth. It could be by 50%, it could be by more. I'm just giving hypotheticals because every situation is, obviously different. And the whole goal is that when we're creating generational wealth, we want to make sure that everything that we worked so hard for in this lifetime gets transferred to our family and our loved ones, so they can carry that on to the generations after us. And so I think that a lot of us, we're using the word generational wealth, And I think the intentions are good, but I don't think that people truly understand what the process looks like and how you actually create it.
Exactly. The whole dynamic. It's a whole dynamic that needs to be explained just the way you explained it. Yeah.
Yes,
Beautiful.
absolutely.
Beautiful.
It's
So,
crazy,
okay.
so crazy.
It is. It is. So, okay. So here's where you can get into what you have coming up. So, do you have any set of key priorities in your work right now, like what you have coming up?
Yeah, so this year, I've been working with a lot of different organizations. I've created a financial literacy curriculum. So I teach financial literacy in schools, but different nonprofits. So they'll hire me on as a contractor and we'll run a financial literacy program. And it depends on the organization, how they want that curriculum to be executed, and I can tailor it to that specific organization's needs. But like I was mentioning, I have a lot of kids stuff coming out. So by the ending of this year, there's going to be a children's book on financial literacy. There's going to be also, I'm creating songs right now on financial literacy. So there'll be
Mhm.
music, YouTube channel with all of that stuff, because it's to just teach it. I think it can get played out really quickly, but if you put it in music, it's entertaining, it's retainable, it's repetitive, right? So it sticks to us. So I'm creating that currently right now as well. I actually, so I also do, business coaching for small and medium-sized entrepreneurs. And I have a branding and business scaling conference that's going to be coming out in September as well. And in November, I have a wealth building gala. So I did a gala 2 years ago, which was really successful. There was about 150 people. Tickets were sold out. So I'm going to be
Nice.
doing that again this year. So it's going to be a conference and a gala. So it's going to be super exciting.
Oh, amazing. Well, I'll definitely hit you up on that because my daughter, she's a performer, but we'll get into that
Okay, that's
after.
amazing. Yes.
Great, great, great. So, do you have any closing thoughts or calls to action?
I would just say, I think a lot of times people feel like in order for them to reach out for help or, get an advisor or start getting their money affairs in order, that they already have to have their things figured out before they can go to someone. And I think I'm not going to speak for everyone. I could just speak for myself and how I operate in this space. For me, it's not about you having your things together. It's about you having your mind ready to take action. So as long as you're ready, it doesn't matter how far you think you are or how ahead you think you may be. Everybody can use this knowledge, and it really just starts with something as simple as that. Like even with myself, when I told you at the beginning that I went to the bank and they denied me, I'd look at that as like one of the biggest blessing in disguise, because if that didn't happen, I would not be in this space right now. I would still be doing what I was doing, working 5 jobs, still trying to figure things out. But all it takes is one step, and that one step leading into one action, and then it slowly becomes a snowball effect. And you'd be surprised how far you can get in a short period of time. Because even though at that time when I went to the bank, I was $33,000 in debt, in a span of 3.5 years, I paid off the 33,000. I put 93,000 on my first property. I saved up an additional $30,000 for an emergency fund. I quit all my 5 jobs and I started working full time for myself in the middle of the pandemic. So things can happen if you want it to happen, and if you believe in yourself, and you're just ready to work. It does take a lot of sacrifice. I'm not going to say it's going to be a breeze and it's a walk in the park. It takes sacrifice, it takes discipline. But if you have those things, I promise that you can get anywhere you want to be.
That's it. That's it. Powerful. So, oh my gosh, Harpreet, this is so powerful. Like so many people out there. I mean, I know it's just resonating with them and they're going to reach out to you, because I think another big thing that's missing too is that mentorship, that real commitment from our financial advisors that really want to help the community and just help people in general. Get from zero to 100. Even if we can get to 0 to 50, that'd be great. At least we're climbing up. We're not going down.
Exactly.
So we want to appreciate your time. We thank you so much, your remarkable spirit, your
Thank
leadership.
you.
We really appreciate it. And we close the way that we began. this interview by acknowledging the original stewards of the lands, various lands we are on. We also acknowledge our ancestors. We acknowledge all those who toiled without compassion or compensation. We acknowledge all the elders and community stalwarts whose shoulders we stand on as we build, share, and learn together for our collective liberation and sovereignty. So I want to thank you again. I really appreciate it. And I'm sure we're going to have you back many, many more times for Setsi, things that we have going on for the community.
Thank you. I really appreciate it. It was lovely and a pleasure being on here. And it was so great talking with you. I love your energy.
Oh, thanks. It's mutual. All right.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
No problem.